Hi, everyone. We have an all-youth panel that's just about to get going in 1 minute, where we have one final panelist that's going to join us. It should be in gallery view so we can all be seen. We have Sam Talam from Nairobi, Kenya, who will be coming onto the video shortly, but in order to keep track of time, in about 30 seconds, I'm just going to get the session going. Thanks everybody for engaging, and we're really thrilled to be joining everyone today. We'll start in a few seconds.
Maybe.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today for Time to Rise, Resilience and Connection in the Face of Uncertainty, a Cities Rise live event. What we're here to talk about is really some of the fundamental underpinnings of how we live and be with everybody in our community and society. And we're talking about how mental health plays out in the lived experience of young people, and that's not a universal experience. The way young people grow up and live and the way they experience mental health across the world and across geographies looks very different. And we very much believe that it's not solely about talking about mental health from a health system perspective, but looking at the intimate intersections that mental health comes out in all aspects of life, from the justice system to the education system to public space to the various ways in which young people just engage with their friends and peers. Mental health is an intersecting aspect of daily life, and we want to ensure that any conversation with young people honors that level of intersectionality, and then also allows their diverse voices from different places in the world and different perspectives to join in. And so I'm really thrilled to be joined today by Nia, Kelly, Dwaraki, and Bhairavi, and Sam Talam, who will be joining us soon. I'm sure he's just coming online. He'll be coming in from Kenya. And so I'll be co-moderating this session with Kelly Davis, a close friend and colleague. And I'll let you kick us off, Kelly, from here. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really grateful to be here with everybody. Just to kind of reiterate and build on some of the things Lian said, when we talk about mental health, what we've been doing and how we've been investing, whether that's ignoring mental health, whether that's just not investing in it, or whether that's actively harming people by how we address mental health and what we build, we weren't meeting people's needs. With the global pandemic that we're currently in, everybody's mental health is really at stake and being affected. And I think that this is a really important opportunity for us to reshape and continue this movement to reshape who's in leadership, who we listen to, and what is important. And I think lived experience, as Lian said, is so incredibly important, because folks with lived experience of mental health challenges, of psychiatric disabilities, but also of different forms of oppression, have been building resources in their communities this entire time and have often been kept out of leadership positions, whether that's on the policy level, whether that's at the financing level. We have this really great opportunity to really tap into the wisdom that communities have to really address mental health for all of us. And I think in my work, particularly with young people, that goes without saying. Young people, in my experience, really instinctively and based on their experience, understand that all of these different parts of who we are and how we fit into the world and to our communities impacts our mental health and well-being. And I think the other thing that is really exciting for me in my work personally and my work with other young people is it's not just about sharing our stories. It's not just about, yes, it's about being seen and being validated and being heard, but the commitment of young people to share knowledge with one another from within our communities, and to create clear pathways for engagement and support and healing and joy and transformation and all of the things we care about is not just viewed as an individual experience, is not just viewed as a separate, this is the mental health thing, but is really about comprehensively supporting individuals and collectively sharing power and creating clear pathways for engagement, whether that's with our families, our friends, our government, or whatever. So on that note of really having this collective impact and collective understanding, I want to open it up with a question to Nia, specifically talking about what's been happening in the US recently. We've been witnessing the upheaval of centuries-long oppression and pain that's deeply impacting young BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And when working with young people in your work in Sacramento, where do you start when discussing these intersections of race, mental health, and social injustice?
Thank you so much. I'll answer that question in just a second. I want to introduce myself. My name's Nia MooreWeathers. I am the community organizer at a local nonprofit located in Sacramento, California, in the United States. We're called Youth Forward, and our main objective is to support marginalized youth here in the county and statewide through some of our work. But one of the main focuses that we try to ensure is that youth are receiving the resources that they need to live full and successful lives, and safe lives primarily, right? Making sure that they have funding streams, making sure that they have after-school resources. And one of the opportunities that I got to participate in last year was something called the Blunt Talk program. This is related to the question, right? We talk about the centuries long racism and disinvestment that the BIPOC community has suffered here in America, specifically because of the system that we have at work here. So when I'm talking with youth around race, mental health, and social injustice, it usually has to start with the discussion of the self, and then a greater discussion around the system that we exist in, right? A lot of the time for youth, I'll start around identity markers, right? So who do we identify as, and how do those identities intersect with some of the issues that we see? I'd say that that's probably where I start with youth. It's really important to know who you are, because you bring yourself out into the world every single day. It's important to know how other people react to that as well. What are your values? What do you think is important? When we can establish that with our youth, that's when I usually move to a systems re-education. And I call it a re-education because a lot of the youth who I work with are high school aged, right? They're right in the middle of intense American history curriculum, and a lot of important American history that often isn't accurately portrayed in our history textbooks that we give our youth. So a lot of the time I have to do a large dissemination of the lies that they've been told. We have to end up talking about slavery. We have to talk about colonization. We have to talk about the genocide of Native Americans in America. We have to talk about Jim Crow laws, the Great Depression, the industrial era, moving forward into the modern century, talking about the war on drugs, Reaganomics, and some of the police brutality that we see that's so rampant in our country right now. And so I'd say that that's usually where we have to start. How does that connect back to youth mental health? I think we all know the answer to that, right? During this particular period of quarantine, during the pandemic here in America, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to be on Instagram, be on Facebook, but I know that if you're a young person, you definitely have. And right now, social media is absolutely inundated with a lot of traumatic experiences that people are suffering, but I would say more specifically the Black community right now in America, just a lot of violence, a lot of discrimination. And so this has a direct impact on our youth. And just to bring it back to the topic at hand, we're still in a pandemic, right? We're still dealing with COVID. So we've got compounding issues. The way I kind of see it, America has a mental health issue. America has a mental health issue. We've created this system where our youth cannot thrive, and now our youth are suffering mental health issues at a greater rate, and we're not doing the required work that needs to be done in order to fix those problems.
Thanks so much, Nia. And I really am grateful for you to start off the day with those poignant messages that our shared histories, but also our individual cultural and familial histories play out in the present. And however we can tap into that, the better. And I just want to note now, you know, in my positionality as a white cis male in the world who also works on a global stage, the layers of colonization and integration need to be talked about. And for the white allies out there, I can say from my own experience that I have a lot of work to do, and a lot of all white people have a lot of work to do to start reconciling how we contribute to these oppressive systems and the inner work that we all need to do the transformation, to show up and be there as powerful allies. And that work is endless, it's lifelong. So I don't think it's a point of an end, it's a continuous process of deepening and deepening and deepening. And I appreciate you bringing in a US context, but all of the things you said are actually applicable on a global level. And Bhairavi, you're joining us from India today, and I would really love to hear from you on how do you define intersectionality and how does it apply to your work?
Thanks, Lian. And thank you, Nia, for explaining the situation there so clearly. So I'm Bhairavi Prakash. I'm a psychologist and I'm the founder of Mitra Trust. I'm also somebody who's had a lived experience with depression for many years. So I've been a psychologist in different settings. I've set up school mental health systems. I've set up corporate mental health systems. I've gone to colleges and set up mental health systems there. But when I started Mitra, and Mitra means friend in Sanskrit, the idea was to provide information, resources, and tools in a really engaging way that a young person would understand. And that really came out of my needs, where I couldn't find anything about depression or mental health issues from a lived person's experience. It was always really medical and very biological. So when I decided to set up my organization, I wanted it to be a not-for-profit and I wanted it to be in social impact. And I'd keep hearing this word intersectionality. It was something new. I hadn't really heard it before and I didn't get it. I'd keep saying, look, health is at the intersection of everything. So what are you talking about? Like, explain this to me, break it down to me, help me understand. And I ended up doing a course with the Amani Institute, which is a social innovation management course. And I got introduced to systems thinking there. And that's when things slowly started to fall into place. I studied the youth mental health crisis in India, and specifically with suicide. And there were two reasons for this. One was a friend of mine had taken her own life when she was 21. And since then, the rates of suicides in India, especially student suicides, has increased dramatically. And right now, every hour, a young person's taking their own life. And I wasn't able to understand what had happened from then to now. You know, there's been so much happening with mental health. Why hasn't this improved? What's going on there? So that was one question that I wanted to ask. The second was, there's also been this really amazing and incredible new mental health law that came in 2017, very, very progressive. But again, I didn't see any changes after that with implementation. And I was like, what's going on? What are the gaps here? Why am I not seeing these changes? And that's when the systems approach started to come in. With a bunch of systems thinkers, academic people, researchers, we went in to map the system. And this was a challenge by the University of Oxford. So we mapped the system for youth suicides in India. And with that, we found 4 systems specifically. And what we also did was we wanted to hear from higher education institutes, so college students themselves, about factors that impacted their mental health. And we wanted to hear from people who've been working on the ground tirelessly for decades. What do they see as some of the systemic issues that are there? And what I found was incredible. So I'll take you to the systems that we mapped first. So there were 4 broad systems that we mapped. The first was the education system, the academics. The second was the legal system. The third is your health system. And the fourth was the social system. And within this, when we asked students, what were the top 5 things that factors that affected your mental health and well-being? It was the top 5. Parental pressure, academic pressure, fear of the future, relationships, discrimination. And that's when it just hit me that all of these things that we've been working towards from a mental health perspective has its root in a systemic base. And again, with all the conversations that we had with the specialists and the experts, they basically explained what band-aid solutions were and how most of the solutions that we've had till now have not been systemic in that they don't look at root causes. You're just at the surface and you've got a quick band-aid there and you hope that, it's going to solve everything, which is why it hasn't been working. There has been so much of work in India over the past 10 years, but why hasn't it been effective? Like the question that I had in terms of why hasn't there been so many changes, that it got answered there. So then I started to examine the kind of work that we do at Mitra Trust. So we created this self-discovery toolkit called the Meh Kit. When you're just feeling meh, you're not okay. So the Meh Kit was born out of my own lived experience with depression. And we have a character there in the Meh Kit. I don't know if you can see it, it's somewhere there. But the idea was to look at a character and not see gender, not see any sort of race, caste, any sort of identification, but instead to see yourself reflected back. And at that time when we were designing it, we didn't have these tools or these words of intersectionality. I just knew that I wanted people reflected. But now going back, I can see how it plays into the system. There's another series that we do called The Meh and Me, where we ask boys and men to share stories of times where they haven't been okay and how it was for them. And the kind of responses that we get to that, basically saying that, if you hadn't told me that this was a man sharing, I would have automatically assumed that it was a woman, because men don't show emotions like this, boys don't show emotions like this. So we started to challenge the stereotypes of what it means to be a man. I'm still trying to figure out in terms of intersectionality where all of this fits, but I'm starting to understand in terms of systems where the kind of work that we do fits in.
Looks like
I hope that answered your question, Lian.
Brilliantly. Thank you so much for your kind words.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to build off of some of the things that you brought up. I think it really segues nicely talking about the lived experience and specific communities and having that lived experience guide what's built. And I wanted to transition over to DK to ask you to tell us a little bit about your work, but then also specifically how's COVID-19 impacted the LGBTIQ community that you work with? And what do you feel needs to be emphasized for anyone trying to support LGBTQI youth right now?
So I'm Dwaraki Ram. I'm from Chennai. I've been a counselor for like 2 years, and I'm working with this organization called Orinam, which is a peer support group for LGBTIQ youth. So the thing is, the main thing that we concentrated before COVID happened was, the stigma, discrimination, violence, and the exclusion that happens in the community. And with the people who are outside the community, we try to educate them. We try to help them with, by educating them. But this COVID thing has it's a different thing that we weren't prepared for, because people started becoming independent and they were out of their house. They were like looking for jobs and they started working, and people lost their jobs because they depend on the paycheck. And surprisingly, the thing is, the community came together. Like we created different WhatsApp groups so that people who have any issues, they can just contact us. And the other thing in India is youth kind of youngsters will live with their parents, and during this lockdown they had to spend more time with their parents, and they brought out this topic about marriage, which they are not mentally prepared for, because most of them are not mentally prepared to come out because of the environment and the support that they didn't have. But because of that, they face some assaults, some abuse inside the house, and that is not a safe place. So we kind of had to move them to some other location. It was kind of it was a bad thing that happened, and we never expected this. And now that the community is together, people are kind of opening up. They are like they're just saying, okay, fine, he can come and stay with me, or she can come and stay with me, because there are like many other things as well, when it comes to access to healthcare. people who are going through hormonal therapy and people who have chronic conditions, the medications, the access to medications and stuff, it's not that easier. It's free, but it's not that easy because of the lockdown, people are unable to get out of their house. But these groups, these support groups, people who are running these groups, everyone came together, like it's like one whole family where they supported each other, where they kind of, if a person is living nearer to a hospital, that person kind of takes the medicine and he delivers it to the other person who is living in that, who needed those medications. So all these were happening, and we were glad that these are happening. So when it comes to mental health issues, all these support groups, all these groups has, trained mental health professionals. During this time, everyone kind of felt, lonely, and they were like started thinking much about their future and everything. But these professionals, we kind of made it easier so that people kind of, they can reach us out like anytime, they can talk to us, they can get in touch with the community. There are like various support groups. In Orion, the person who runs it, who's called Ramki, he's the one who's organizing like every meeting. He has like 2 to 3 meetings per week, and during that meeting, people share a lot. And coming out is like a very stressful thing when the person is not prepared because of the pressure about marriage and stuff. It's not that easier for them to process certain things. So when they share about things, people who experience the same thing, they can help them, they can get in touch with them. And I've seen people becoming friends over this period of time because it's been over 100 days after this lockdown thing happened, and things are, yeah, it's getting better. We are just giving them hope. We are just trying to make sure everyone is in touch, because social media is something that brought us together, and we are glad that we are using it in a positive way. And I hope, the community kind of, it remains the same way, like a family. And yeah.
Thanks so much, DK. And, one of the things that I hope our listeners are feeling and hearing is, when we deeply listen, particularly to the stories of young people, but also of marginalized and oppressed groups, and one that's close to my heart is the LGBTIQ community, who I just strongly believe that the whole world has so much to learn from the resilience and struggles, particularly Black and trans folks that are in the queer community, who have increasingly so many intersectional layers of challenge, that the resilience and the joy and the creation that happens in those groups is something I think we should honor and celebrate. And I just want to take a moment to echo to any young person who is in the process of transition or coming out that, I know the mental health community has not always been a welcoming space to people from those orientations, and that's not something we want to stand for anymore. And we fundamentally detest that and are trying to create a world where people feel safe and loved when they go to seek services. But we know that that's not always the case. And that's that's the state of affairs, but we want better. And with that, words are not always enough. Sometimes we can't just say things or demand action. There's different ways of expressing and knowing. There's different ways knowledge is stored. And so Sam from Kenya, who just joined us, increasingly, younger generations are seeing the power of art for healing, and they seem to be more open and willing to talk about their mental health needs. What is your reaction to this? And as someone working on student mental health in college campuses in Kenya, why is art and expression so important when talking about mental health with young people?
Thank you so much, Lian. Three things for me that came to mind when you asked that question is, like young people love to be engaged in fun ways. First, most young people from my experience I have interacted with, say if we are not having fun, then we are not learning. So art has some way of bringing out, playfulness, creativity, and spontaneity in people. So when you use art, and increasingly art is proving to be a critical form of education in our community, because you can share information at the same time, people having fun. And the second thing that comes to mind is participation. Sometimes I believe we just don't want to see our stories play out, but we want to be able to participate and have a voice in the realities of our lives. And so art, has that bit where young people are invited to join in their stories. Maybe a case study of the work that we do on campus using community theater. We use forum theater and psychodrama. So a very critical component of forum theater and psychodrama is, we would do a play, and we would, for example, showcase a situation where a young person, for example, suicide, which is such a huge thing in Kenya right now. So before a young person commits suicide, there were like realities that they were faced with, and they felt like, this was the end of life. Like there's nothing more I can do. So we can play that, whether it's different factors that came into play, whether it's family influence, whether it's friends influence, whether it's school influence, or society's pressure. So we would play that out, and we would ask participants, did you like what you saw there? And different people would react differently based on their perceptions and opinions. So like that's like a core group of actors would be showcasing that, and then we would invite the participants themselves and ask them, what would you change in that story? And through that interaction, where everyone is given a chance to participate in transforming those narratives that they're seeing on stage, and afterwards having a discussion, and like in the case study of our work, the goal hasn't really been to find a solution, but to have like a good debate where information is shared, because I understand that different people are coming from different places, and that just that kind of community shared wisdom allows young people to be able to see their situations and their life where they are, and it challenges them to become better people and change their narratives, their day-to-day narratives. And the third bit I see is that kind of contribution as equal partners, like not being seen as like the people and like traditional theater. I don't have any problem with traditional theater, but that bit where people can contribute to their stories, people can contribute to their realities, is really like a critical bit that I see theater and art really contributing hugely to, and that kind of bringing on symbols, things like sarcasm, symbolism, in challenging people to transform their narrative. Sometimes it's really hard to give people feedback if they're doing something that we do not like. But if we use art, then it's a very light way of sharing that kind of perspective and feedback, and people feel appreciated, people feel respected, and they're able to transform the things that's not working in their lives. So that's why theater and art is really like is a really critical bit, especially in engaging young people and allowing young people to share their stories, and collectively transform the things that we do not like in our society and in our lives and in our society.
Thanks so much, Sam. I hope the audience is able to start seeing the cross-cutting themes that each panelist has talked to in different ways. We have a few more questions that we're going to go through, but we have a good segment towards the end of this session to respond to questions from the audience. So if you're on the chat or on the Facebook live stream, please start channeling your questions to the chat box, and they'll be sent to me to be able to bring to the panelists. We'll be able to get through a few towards the end, but we do have a fair bit of time blocked for that. Kelly, I guess, as you're someone who both comes from a place of lived experience, but also peer support, as you hear each of the panelists share their stories, what's coming up for you?
I think what's coming up for me, and what always comes up for me in conversations like this is really how much the paradigm needs to shift in what we're doing to address mental health, particularly with young people. It's kind of like we've said, okay, we decide, people in positions of power and authority and medical authority have decided that like this is an individual intervention level problem. We take people and sit them in an office and talk to them. And I think that there's just so many other ways to do that, to make it interesting and engaging and to not strip people of their context. I think, right, like if somebody is experiencing oppression and marginalization and you aren't talking about that, like your services effectively exist to adjust people to their own oppression and not taking a lens that brings those things into the room, and not only just brings those things to the room, but like it's not just about we're resolving these issues. Like we also want to have fun, we also want life to be about joy, we want to bring in the social justice piece and the rights piece, but it's also not just about suffering too, it's about transforming suffering. I think that's why art and like narratives through art are so important. But I just think it's so promising and cross-cutting across what everyone is saying is just, this is not top down. How we transform the world is not top down. It's about going into communities and empowering people, particularly young people, and saying, okay, this works, and we're going to support you in building in the same way that, I talk a lot about in tech, right? In tech, they don't say, okay, I know what's right for you and I'm going to build it. It's we're really working in partnership to say, this is engaging to people, this is not engaging to people. Like, how do we not only build in that way, but continuously improve and evolve in that way? So I just think that the lived experience, combining lived experience and understanding of justice as we work to improve the lives of individual people and to empower them to heal and celebrate and grow and evolve, while also having that same approach to systems and governments and structures, is just so important and so fundamentally aligned with the history of kind of the like peer support, consumer survivor, ex-patient movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And to all the panelists, if you guys have a question for anybody else or want to jump in, we're going to move into more of an open discussion format. But I do want to channel it back to Nia, who opened up the conversation, and say, there's a lot of young people watching today, and you're a community organizer, and young people are often looking for guidance on what it means to take action. And so when a young person, when you're working with young people and you're trying to align them on how do you act, what's the advice you give and what's the process you take?
Okay, so again, very similar. I feel like I'm going to have a similar part of my answer that you gave to my first question when we were talking about race and mental health and social justice. I think, again, it starts with you. Right? You have to know who you are and what your values are. What do you want to fight for? What hill are you willing to die on, basically? I hate that is sometimes the way that I phrase it with my youth, but when we talk about social justice work and social justice campaigning in particular, you have to be in it for the long haul. When we look at when we go back to the 1960s and we look at the civil rights movement and Dr. Martin Luther King, that movement lasted hundreds of days before the Civil Rights Act was passed. And so I remind my students of that, to know that you have to be determined, you have to be strong, and you have to know what your values are. I think another thing I would tell youth is that you need to get to know other people who have those similar values. You need to be looking for allies in your community. When I had the opportunity to work on a youth fund campaign 2 years ago, we had to do a lot of signature gathering. We were knocking on people's doors. And I had a clipboard with me to every single place that I went to. I brought it with me to my parents' house. I brought it to family events. I took it in my car when I was in an Uber or a Lyft going to my next meeting. I got Lyft drivers to sign it. I would walk around randomly in my neighborhood playing Pokemon Go 4 years late and getting people to sign my petition. So It's a everyday opportunity. You have to give a little bit of yourself to it every single day. I think too that when we're talking about driving the social justice agenda in your community, you shouldn't just be including yourself and the people that you know. You should be looking for people who you've never connected with before. And primarily, you would want to look for stronger allies that might exist at your local level, your state level, your county level, your city level, wherever you happen to be. Look for those people who are already doing that type of work. Again, another little self story here. When I was involved with criminal reform work last year around marijuana related cases and getting people out of jail for that, before I started my process, I looked around in Sacramento City to see if there were any organizations who were already working on things like that. And I found 5 or 6 organizations who already were. So I knew I'm not going to have to do this by myself. There are other people who have already laid some foundational work. I can connect with them. They will be able to provide me with experience. I'm still a young person in Sacramento doing community work. I'm 26. A lot of the people that I found had at least 10 years of experience. They've been doing this for a long time. And as a youth, I think that there's a wealth of knowledge out there that we can benefit from. So if we're unsure, there are people who we can look to help us. And I think too, at all times, lifting your voice. I think for youth especially, adultism is real. I think that youth are often pushed to the sides. Their thoughts and feelings are not respected. And so coming into perhaps an adult space, maybe you're going to a larger meeting, city council meeting, maybe you're going to a state capitol and you're trying to argue your case. Remember to be strong, to know that you're important and that your voice matters. I think that's the main thing I would say. Do not be afraid to say what you have to say and to say what's affecting you. I think that's what I would have to say. You know, make sure you know who you are and stay strong, lift your voice, and find those right people who you know are going to help you.
Yeah. Word. I definitely appreciate that. And I come to this work from my own lived experience and was in therapeutic treatment for many years. And out of my privileged position in the world, I had options and choices and still struggled and still didn't find that my voice was heard in that system. But then also recognize that every layer of the system creates other barriers and missed opportunities for people to be heard and their voices engaged. And, one of the things we know, particularly when it comes to mental health, is that when you engage young people from the very beginning, when you create a space for their leadership, from idea inception to delivery to evaluation, that's when you get the best results. When there's that shared ownership from the onset. And what we've seen is that we're in a unique phase in time, I believe, where the shift is happening, but it's not good enough yet. And there remains a lot of youth tokenism out in the world. There remains a lot of pulling out youth panels and like youth advisory groups in the last minute to check off that youth engagement box. And so I think as young people, we really want to see a radical shift in how that works. As Kelly mentioned in the very beginning, it's about shared power and shifting power, but it's also about idea inception. It's the youth ideas and youth-led ideas being generated and then actualized, not enabling young people to, execute on a vision that they didn't create. And so I think that's really important. And I think there's many different pathways to engagement. And so DK, I'd like to ask you, because, you're coming from India and have been working with young people who often are not heard. And I just want to hear from you what strategies or tools you use to help people find their voice.
So during this lockdown, when youngsters are being forced to spend more time with their families, there have been many issues, as I said before, when they were like pressuring them to get married and stuff. So they were like, the conversion therapy, that's a really bad thing that's happening like all over the world, where people kind of do this illegally. But now recently they kind of banned in the Psychiatry Association in India. But the thing is, people are still practicing that. So that's kind of that's a bad thing. That's that we never expected, because during this period it was in a larger number. So what we did was, we got in touch with other mental health professionals who are supportive, who are ready to educate the parents, educate the children who needs all sort of guidance and everything. Because uh, India is a place where things were like kind of conservative. It's not like sex education is not quite common, or people don't talk about it. So what we did was, we plan to launch this WhatsApp group or something like that, so that people can get in touch with us. And you know educating the parents, it's not like an easy thing. They are not going to understand something that they are not used to. So that's what we were doing, and things are going good. And hopefully, mm, we want this conversion therapy to end, so that people don't go through such traumatic experience and stuff. So we are working on that, and we are working with the other mental health professionals, so that this will come to an end. And the support groups are like amazing, because we never thought that people will come together, because there were like support group in different parts of India. And in some support groups we never had a conversation or anything. We never had any, because we have like 22 official languages. The languages differ, everything is like kind of different, and our cultures differs inside the country itself. So what we did was, we wanted to connect the rural and urban people, and we want to connect the whole country. So the technology kind of helped us, and the mental health professionals, they came together, so that youngsters who want to talk to any mental health professionals, they can reach us out. And it's easier for them than before, because they are in larger numbers. People from Kashmir can talk to someone who knows Kashmiri, or people from Tamil Nadu can talk to someone who knows Tamil. Or if that person is living in some other state or in some other country, that person can reach out and talk to them and connect with them in their own language. So yeah, that's how things are going now, and I hope things get better in the future. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, go.
Yeah, no, I was going to say thanks, DK. I think picking up on some of the things you mentioned, I wanted to ask a question of Bhairavi. As you see the impact of COVID-19 on the young people you work with in India, what are you and your organization doing to be responsive to the needs that young people are identifying for themselves?
Very similar to what Nia and Dwaraki have said so far, in that it's definitely amplified. And again, given the fact that in India, most people, until they get married, and sometimes even after that, are living with their families. So space is limited. The sense of privacy doesn't exist anymore. And your own sense of self, boundaries, all just diminish. So things that, even if you've been in therapy and you've been working really hard to establish boundaries, it just goes for an absolute toss. So what we did see is a huge upsurge of people asking for help, and not necessarily people with existing mental health conditions. We saw a whole new group come into, so we have a peer group discussion called Let's Discuss the Mayor. It started off as a depression support group, but with COVID, we kind of expanded it. It's limited to about 6 people, so that everybody get to talk and share. And everybody there has lived experiences, including the facilitator. So the idea is to give people a safe space where they can talk about things, and sometimes just the act of venting it out and expressing yourself and not having judgment issued on you, that this isn't something that's culturally right, or what you're doing is wrong. That in itself is liberating. And the fact that these services were free, because it was part of a grant for us, and we were able to give people these services. Again, that huge impact, because we've seen people as young as 14 to as old as 42 sit on groups together. And again, sharing from across these age groups has been incredible and really rich. You get people to see each other's worldviews and what they're going through. The other thing, again, going to what DK had said so far, is about the LGBTQ community. We've seen a huge uprise in different kinds of queer people basically coming in and accessing our services. They're looking for safe spaces, and they're also looking for spaces where it isn't necessarily issues based, but more well-being based, where especially with a lot of activists, we've been seeing that they're getting burnt out. There's so much happening from our country. I think we started off with riots at the start of the year, and since then it's just been, there's just been so much of civil unrest, and then you have the pandemic, and we're in the middle of a humanitarian crisis right now. So we've seen this with a lot of activists that are really young people, high school, college, early 20s, who are using their voice in social media, but they need safe spaces as well. So we've seen a huge upsurge again in them asking for help and for services, and for using peer services especially. The other interesting element is people who are alone. So as much as you have people who are stuck with family and don't have a sense of privacy, you have a lot of people who are alone, who were living or working or studying in different parts of the country, who haven't been able to go back home yet. And they're just sick and tired of talking to the walls and screaming and shouting at the walls, and they just want to meet a group of strangers that they can just share their most intimate feelings with and again feel safe. So this sense of safety has been coming in over and over and over again. And we've been able to do this again because we've moved virtual. And one of the biggest issues with moving virtual was, A, how do we maintain safety? B, how do you translate that warmth? How do you translate that sense of community, that sense of belonging that you feel when you meet face to face, when there's a group that's sitting in a circle that's seeing each other? So those are some of the things that we're working with our community through different conversations, asking them, getting their feedback, constantly improving. And again, for us, that's really important because like I said, we have people with lived experiences running these services. So hearing from others to constantly make sure and understand that they're okay with what's happening, that they feel safe, that they feel secure, that the training is right, that, in case of trigger warnings, for instance, if in a session it wasn't there, like what are some of the things that we can do to rectify that? What are some of the other ways that they would feel safe? Are there people coming into the sessions that shouldn't be coming in? Is there some sort of security measure or feature that we need to be looking at? Because right now, anybody could join as long as they fill in a form. It's open to everybody. So, and these are things that the community has been helping us with. So again, there's been a lot of engagement that we're seeing just because it's digital and from different parts of the country. And another thing we noticed was people, especially young people, like going to Sam's point, they want something beyond just talking. So we started a doodle session. So with doodling, again, with everything that we do at Mitra, we believe in giving people tools that they can use in their own time. So our facilitator, Advaita, is incredible, basically figured out a method of, different strokes, different dashes, different curls. How do you identify your emotions with that? How do you connect with your breathing? How do you let it all out during that session while you're breathing in your cup? And that's been really, really impactful again. And a whole different set. It's been really interesting about the different kinds of people that come for the Let's Discuss the Mayor session and the Doodles for the Mayor session. And you can see that equally, people like to talk and people like to not talk. And again, with Doodles for the Mayor, you're with a group of strangers, but you're there in silence where you're doodling, you're grunting, you're crying, you're actually releasing a lot. So it's been interesting to just kind of scurry, certainly for the team. We've been working really long hours. I don't think there's work-life integration, work-life balance. None of that really exists if you've been in the mental health field since the pandemic started. But I think we're just living in a zone where people haven't, at least people in our near future, haven't lived in that zone. So it's a learning experience for us, that's for sure.
Yeah, so all the mental health practitioners or young people working on mental health, take care of yourself. We all fall into the traps of burnout because we care so much and we know the issues. And, something I've learned in my own experience is that like my healing is through service. And so, part of the way that I grapple with my own challenges and pain is to serve. And I sometimes forget to do the inner work that I need to do actively while that's happening. And so just to pat yourself on the back and remember to take care of yourself. I'm getting some really great questions in from the audience, and so I'm going to transition to those. And you know, you guys can respond freely, but try to keep your segments kind of short so we can get through a few of these really good ones. So I think this question is a good place to start. And Sam, maybe if you could start off responding to this question, and then we can go around, is in what ways are we best able to protect our most vulnerable youth from tokenism and performative efforts to engage them, while simultaneously supporting them in finding and sharing their voice? And so I'll read it just one more time because I think this is a critical question that we all need to be asking ourselves. In what ways are we best able to protect our most vulnerable youth from tokenism and performative efforts to engage them, while simultaneously supporting them in finding and sharing their voice?
Yeah, thanks, Lian. I think it just goes back to you know, respecting people, and you know, when otherwise initiated people because they you know, people who young to give perspectives and feedback and not appreciating that they took their time, they took their creativity, they shared their stories, they, you know, contributed to partners or like community narrative. So just for me, I look at it in that it's just the respect that we give people and everyone, whether it's young people or whether it's you know, community work, that we're able to support and appreciate actually people's time and people's contribution to the work that we do. So I'm really frustrated when young people are taken through the tokenism bit, while older people are you know, being given money or resources for their contribution. So I think it's that kind of, and especially mental health being an issue or a problem of the young people. I believe that young people should be the one who are you know, spearheading the conversations and being appreciated for that. You know, the statistics are saying that 75% of all mental health issues start by age 24. So, and young people have the wisdom, understand the problem, and have the solutions. And it's really frustrating when you see young, the older people coming in and trying to tell young people what to do when, you know, young people really understand the challenges they're going through and know the solutions. So I believe there needs to be that kind of intergenerational partnership and respect for young people, that they also have something to say and to contribute.
I want to see if anybody else wants to respond to that question in a tidbit. I have a few more questions to go through. Yeah, go ahead, Nia.
I just want to echo what Sam said. I think you're exactly right. I think it's about, for me, like intentionality and empathy, right? It's about being intentional with your want to actually support those youth, and you're not having some sort of second agenda behind the scenes. I think that's something that Lian, you maybe kind of touched on at the beginning of our call when you talked about, you know, bringing in a youth commission at the very end of the meeting to sign off on something. I can't tell you how many times I've seen something like that happen. And again, to echo you, Sam, I find that extremely frustrating because, you know, you want to be able to let our youth speak their truth. And I think too, again, it's about empathy and compassion. Do you actually care? Do you really, truly care about improving youth lives? From what I've seen, sometimes that can be, I'll scratch your back, you'll scratch mine type of thing. And I really think that when you're doing community work or youth work, all of the work that we participate in, you're doing that out of the goodness of your heart. You're not doing that because you want somebody else to give you something. So intentionality and true empathy, really important.
Yeah, and I would just like to add on that. I think the power of the collective, of like, there should not be one person who speaks for all young people in your work. And I think that part of that is like for young people themselves, like not feeling like with more people included. First, you're getting different perspectives, right? Not all young people think the same. Not all people with similar experiences think the same. But I think it's easier to hold power accountable because you're going into spaces that have historically not valued the voices of young people. And I think having shared groups of people, having different perspectives, having support from other young people, so you don't have to be like the good young person on the panel. And I think too, like one of the biggest things that's made a difference for me is I have a friend and colleague who said, you know, you have more to say than to talk about youth issues. So not pigeonholing people into saying like you're only valuable in like this part of your identity and your understanding of the world, but that you can speak to all of the other issues in a valuable way. You are a young person and that's part of your identity, but that's not your only identity and that's not the only valuable thing you have to add to the conversation.
Yeah, word again, totally agree. And, you know, I think one of the things that I've learned doing youth engagement work is that there needs to be a mixed method approach to how you work with young people. Not all young people like going up and talking in front of groups. Not all young people are extroverted and feel comfortable just showing up on the spot and contributing ideas. Some like to journal, some like to draw, some like to do things alone, some like to do things in groups, some likes to do things virtually, some like to do things in person. And all of those pathways for engagement needs to be cultivated so that the diversity of youth voices can be brought to the table. And, you know, I often have learned over the years about how workshopping and you know, extracting knowledge from young people can really be isolating to a select few voices. And so, you know, as we think about programming and how we run activities, it's really looking at, you know, we're not working with not like a homogenous group. Young people are diverse in their energy, and start with that foundation and create a space for people to offer how they want things to run at the very beginning. And I think that's really important in that co-creation piece, because when you design with people from the very beginning that you're trying to engage, there's a sense of ownership and a desire to contribute in a really unique way. And so I just think participatory approaches from the onset of any activity with young people is super critical. And, you know, to all the adults listening, there's a lot of work that adults need to do to transform the way they engage with young people, the way they show up for young people, and the way in which young people experience, you know, unhealthy power dynamics when working with adults. And that needs to be called out, and, you know, all sides need to grow and change. I think there's a lot asked of young people, and young people are asking a lot of adults to really, you know, change mindsets, understand your positionality, the power that you bring into a room, the role that you have when trying to ask us for ideas. Whether it's comfortable or not for us, that power dynamic exists. And so it's very important to call that out and acknowledge it, and, you know, create spaces that are inclusive and safe. And so, you know, I think, appreciate all of the energy and insights that everybody has brought forward. We have about 3 minutes left, so I'm gonna pull up one more question and then we can do closing words. Thanks everybody who's been engaging on the live chat and on Facebook Live. It's really exciting to see all of this work. So I think this is an important question because it's so critical to the life of young people. And I think we need everybody's responses to be like 4 words or a sentence. But one of the questions that was asked was, you know, does the education system just need to change in India, or is it the whole world, or across the world? And you know, if everybody could give their quick tidbits on, you know, whether they think the education system needs to change or not, that would be great. And DK, I had just asked, you know, one of the questions was, does the education system need to just change in India or the whole world? And so everybody is going to give a quick tidbit of response. And so, Bhairavi, why don't you go first, and then we'll keep going through everybody.
Not just the education system. I think all systems need to change. And it needs to be from the youth. It has to be ground up. It has to be grassroots. Our voices have to be heard. And I mean, it's incredible the amount of young voices that are out there. I just want them to be amplified, and they're doing really, really great work.
Okay.
I totally agree with Bhairavi. And the thing is, I want mental health to be a part of education and our curricular system. You know, talking about that, learning about that, that's very important. At the very young age, when people learn about it, it will be easier for them to understand certain things in life. Uh,
Nia and Sam, a few quick words.
I think, Lian, for me, I would say I feel culture needs to change because systems are anchored around culture and what our day-to-day, how we conduct our businesses, whether it's at family level, whether it's at group level, whether it's community level, or even at society level. So it's really hard to talk about system change. We've seen in Africa, for example, decades of unproductive systems that are not like really putting people or human capital at the forefront. So for me, it's about changing the systems that we're having, and it's a tough task at the level, and everyone coming to the front and saying we want to be able to change the systems, the day-to-day systems in our societies and communities.
Thanks, Sam. Nia, last words from you.
Yes. I think that education systems need to change all over the world, but I think that I'm more inclined to agree with Sam. The culture has to change if we really want the systems change to be super, super effective, because our culture informs the system and the system informs the culture, right? They feed back into each other. So if we're going to have the education system change globally, we would also need the global culture to change. And I think that it would need to change from a more I-focused culture to a more we-focused culture, collective culture. And just education around other kinds of people for our youth. So we can learn about other individuals and we won't start to begin to develop these prejudices that our system pushes on us, right?
Yeah, so yeah, thanks everyone. I really enjoyed getting to spend this last hour with these incredible people from around the world. Many of us have actually never met in person, but there's a shared commitment and joy to doing this work and to creating these voices. As I said earlier, these are healing moments for me. Like, I am glowing on the inside, and the parts that tear at my inner self start to get removed away, and you get more hopeful and you create new pathways for healing. And so I just want to share with everybody what we're about to do next is that we have our next panel starting at 11:45 a.m. EST. It's a thought leader panel. There is youth participation on that panel as well, but it's also a set of international experts that are going to talk about a range of youth issues. In between, we have a different sort of contribution where we're going to be sharing a poetry reading with you guys. So if the youth panelists would like to turn off their videos, I'll be able to set up the live stream for the poetry. I just want to once again thank you all. We pulled this off in a very quick amount of time, and your energy and insights and thoughtfulness really made it happen. So I just want to thank each of you so much.
And thank you guys. Like I've been saying, this is an awesome opportunity. I'm super, super happy to be with you all. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.